The newborn twin daughters of cold CEO Park Seo-joon refuse all nourishment, wasting away. Desperate, the new and humble nanny, Lee Ji-eun, makes a shocking decision. She offers her own breast milk, saving the girls' lives and, unknowingly, beginning to melt the arrogant boss's icy heart. The silence that followed the Park twins' first satisfied cry was the sweetest sound Lee Ji-eun had ever heard. It was a sound of relief, of life. That night, and in the ones that followed, the baby's small room, once a scene of despair and incessant crying, transformed into a sanctuary of peace. Ji-eun, her heart heavy with guilt and hope, continued her secret ritual. She waited until the vast mansion was deep in sleep, the only sound being the distant hum of the air conditioning system. With trembling but steady hands, she would take one of the bottles prepared for formula, discreetly empty it, and then offer her own breast milk to the little ones. It was an act of instinctive love, a primal connection that transcended logic or fear of consequences. The twins, once so fragile and listless, clung to the nipple with a heartbreaking eagerness. They sucked vigorously, their tiny bodies visibly relaxing, their pale faces gaining a rosier hue each day. In just 1 week, the change was undeniable. The cries lessened, replaced by soft coos and even some sleepy smiles. The nurses who came for routine checkups noticed the improvement, attributing it to the miraculous new nanny and her gentle touch. Ji-eun merely smiled, a forced smile that hid the whirlwind of emotions within her, the relief of seeing the girls thrive, the guilt of deceiving her employer, and the constant fear of discovery. Park Seo-joon, CEO Park, was a man of few words and even fewer visible emotions. His routine was a Swiss clock of meetings, phone calls, and billion-1 decisions. Yet even he couldn't ignore the transformation in his home. The nights, once interrupted by sharp cries that echoed through the corridors, were now strangely silent. When he passed by the nursery, he saw the twins sleeping peacefully, something that hadn't happened since their birth. One morning, as Ji-eun was preparing the formula bottles, which the twins now only sniffed and refused to her silent panic, Seo-joon appeared at the door, his suit impeccable and his face inexpressive. "The children are different," he said, his voice deep and uninflected, but with a tone Ji-eun couldn't quite decipher. It was an observation, not a question. Ji-eun felt a shiver run down her spine. "Yes, sir, they're adjusting well. I think they just needed a little more patience." She chose her words carefully, avoiding any mention of her secret. He observed her for a moment, his dark, penetrating eyes fixed on her. Ji-eun felt like an insect under a microscope. "Patience," he repeated, as if testing the word. The other nannies had patience. They couldn't do it. Ji-eun's heart pounded. Perhaps I got lucky, sir, or maybe they just needed a new face, a different scent." She tried to sound as professional as possible, but her hands were sweating. Seo-joon stepped forward, approaching the crib where one of the twins, Ha-eun, was sleeping soundly, a small fist clenched near her mouth. He extended a finger, hesitated, and then lightly touched his daughter's soft cheek. A glimpse of something, perhaps surprise, perhaps a deeper emotion, flickered in his eyes before he masked it again. "Keep it up, Lee Ji-eun," he said, his voice returning to its cold, distant tone. "My daughters need someone who can care for them. It seems you're the first one who could." He turned and left, leaving Ji-eun alone with the echo of his words and the weight of her secret. The twins were thriving, and CEO Park was beginning to notice. But with each passing day, the tightrope Ji-eun walked grew thinner, and the fall, if she were discovered, seemed inevitably more painful. She knew she couldn't keep her secret forever, but the idea of stopping feeding the girls what was saving them was unbearable. 2 weeks passed. The Park twins were now visibly healthier babies, with rosy cheeks and curious eyes that followed Ji-eun around the room. Ji-Yun's fear, however, grew in proportion to the girl's health. She had noticed that the formula bottles she should have been giving the twins remained untouched, or nearly so. Park Seo-joon, despite his apparent indifference, was a man of details. He noticed everything. One night, Ji-Yun was in the nursery, the clock nearing midnight. The twins had just been fed her milk and were sleeping soundly. Ji-Yun was cleaning the bottles, feeling the residual warmth of the milk that had been theirs and the sweet, familiar scent that permeated the air. She was so absorbed in her thoughts, in gratitude and dread, that she didn't hear the soft footsteps in the hallway. The nursery door opened without warning. Park Seo-joon stood there, his tall, imposing silhouette against the faint light of the hallway. His eyes, normally cold and distant, were fixed on Ji-Yun, and there was something in them she had never seen before, a mix of confusion and an almost frightening intensity. Ji-Yun froze. The bottle in her hand slipped and fell to the floor with a dull thud, but not loud enough to wake the babies. The sound echoed in the tense silence. "What are you doing, Lee Ji-Eun?" Seo-joon's voice was low, but laden with an authority that made Ji-Eun's blood run cold. He took a step forward, and then another, his eyes sweeping the room, stopping on the clean bottles, the untouched formula containers, and finally on Ji-Eun's pale face. "Mr. Park," she began, her voice a trembling whisper. He didn't let her finish. His eyes narrowed, and he pointed to one of the bottles Ji-Eun had just used, still with a trace of her milk. "What is this?" he asked, his voice now stronger, sharper. "I demand to know what you are giving my daughters." Ji-Eun felt the world spin. The moment she had so feared had arrived. She looked at the twins, sleeping peacefully, at the man in front of her, and at the bottle on the floor. There was no denying it. The naked, shocking truth was about to be revealed. Ji-Yun felt the air thin in her lungs, her eyes, wide with dread, fixed on Seo-joon's. The fallen bottle on the floor seemed a silent testament to her transgression. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry, her voice caught. Seo-joon took another step, the hallway light illuminating his face, which now seemed carved from stone. He bent down, picked up the bottle from the floor, and held it up, examining the milky residue at the bottom. The scent, subtle but unmistakable, hung in the air. "This is not the smell of the formula we bought," he declared, his voice low, but with an intensity that cut through the silence. "What is this, Lee Ji-Eun? Answer me." Ji-Eun closed her eyes for an instant, a silent prayer escaping her lips. When she opened them, there was a desperate determination in her gaze. She couldn't lie, not anymore. It's breast milk, sir," she whispered, her voice still trembling but now audible. "My own milk." The silence that followed was deafening. Seo-joon froze, the bottle still in his hand. His dark eyes widened slightly, and for a brief moment, Ji-Eun saw a crack in his mask of indifference, revealing deep shock. Your milk," he repeated, incredulity coloring each syllable. "Are you telling me you're feeding my daughters your own milk?" His voice began to rise, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "How dare you? It's a violation, a complete irresponsibility." Ji-Eun stepped forward, her hands clasped in a gesture of supplication. "Sir, please hear me. They were starving. None of the other nannies could get them to eat. They were losing weight. They were so weak." Tears began to roll down her face. I have a small baby too. I still breastfeed. When I saw them so fragile, so lifeless, my mother's heart couldn't bear it. I couldn't watch them waste away." She pointed to the twins, who were sleeping serenely in their cribs, oblivious to the unfolding drama. "Look at them now, sir. They are strong, they are healthy, they are smiling. Breast milk, it's the only thing they accepted. It's what saved them." Seo Jun looked at his daughters. His eyes swept over their rosy faces, their full cheeks, their chests rising and falling at a healthy rhythm. The image of them, so vibrant and full of life, contrasted brutally with the memory of the pale, crying babies of just a few weeks ago. The anger on his face began to mix with a disturbing confusion. You did this without my permission," he said, his voice still laden with fury, but with a questioning tone. "You deceived me." "I know, sir, and I'm so sorry," Ji-eun sobbed. "I was desperate. I didn't know what to do. I just wanted them to live. I had no other choice." She lowered her head, awaiting the verdict. The dismissal, the humiliation. Seo Jun remained silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the twins. He was a man of logic, facts, and results. And the results were there, undeniable. His daughters were thriving. The nanny he had hired, the woman he now knew had acted so boldly and secretly, had achieved the impossible. He felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Fury at the disobedience and breach of trust, but also a strange, unsettling relief, and more deeply, a pang of gratitude he didn't want to admit. "Leave," he finally said, his voice low and controlled, but with a coldness that made Ji-eun tremble. "Leave now. We'll talk about this in the morning." Ji-eun didn't need him to repeat it. She bowed in a silent apology and left the nursery, leaving Seo Jun alone with his daughters and the shocking truth that had turned his world upside down. He looked at the twins, then at the bottle in his hand. What would he do now? Park Seo Jun remained motionless in the nursery for a long time after Ji-eun left. The night's silence was broken only by the soft breathing of the girls. He clutched the bottle, feeling the cold plastic against his fingers. Breast milk, her own milk, the audacity, the transgression, the breach of trust. All of it seethed within him. How dare she? How could she do something so personal, so intimate without his permission? But then his eyes returned to the twins, Hyun and Seoyeon. They were so different. They were no longer the fragile, pale little beings who cried incessantly, refusing every drop of nourishment. Now their cheeks were rosy, their limbs small and plump. They slept with a serenity he hadn't seen since the first days after their birth, before sadness and their refusal to eat consumed them. He remembered the agony of watching them waste away, the overwhelming helplessness he felt as doctors and nannies tried in vain. He, Park Seo Jun, the man who solved 1 billion problems, was incapable of feeding his own daughters. And then this woman, Lee Ji-eun, appeared. Humble, quiet, yet with a silent determination. She had achieved the impossible, and she did it with a secret that now exploded in his face. Anger wrestled with an uncomfortable gratitude, a gratitude he didn't want to feel for someone who had deceived him. But how could he ignore the pulsating life in his daughters? How could he dismiss the woman who, in her audacity, had saved them? He left the bottle on the nightstand and approached Hyun's crib. He lightly touched her small hand. The warmth, the softness. It was real. They were alive, they were well. And the truth, however shocking, was that Ji-eun had been the only one to achieve this. The image of her with tears in her eyes pleading, "I had no other choice," echoed in his mind. He felt strangely exposed, confronted not only with her action, but with his own failure as a father. He hadn't been able to save them. She had. Ji-eun spent the night sleepless. Lying in her bed in the guest room, every creak of the house seemed like Seo Jun's footsteps coming to dismiss her. Her heart pounded erratically. She had been discovered. The truth was out there. What would happen now? Would she lose her job? Be sued for something? Fear gnawed at her, but behind it there was a strange peace. She had done what was right. Her girls were alive, and she didn't regret giving them the only thing that would make them thrive. She thought of her own baby, at home, and the instinctive strength motherhood had given her. It was this strength that drove her to do what she did for the Park twins. At dawn, the shy sun barely peeked over the horizon when a sharp knock on the door made her jump. "Ms. Lee, CEO Park wishes to see you in his office immediately." The housekeeper's voice was formal and emotionless. Ji-eun dressed hurriedly, her stomach churning. She knew this was the moment of reckoning. Park Seo-joon's office was a sanctuary of minimalism and power. Glass walls overlooking the city, an imposing dark wood desk, and he sitting behind it, looking like a marble statue. His eyes, as she entered, were as cold and hard as the glass walls. "Sit down, Lee Ji-eun," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. Ji-eun sat in the chair opposite him, her hands sweating and clasped in her lap. "So," he began, leaning slightly forward, "do you have something to tell me?" Ji-eun took a deep breath. "Yes, sir, I'm sorry for acting without your permission. I understand that what I did was a breach of trust." "Breach is an understatement," he retorted, his voice rising a tone. "You, an employee, made a medical decision about my daughters without even consulting me. You fed them from your own body, without my knowledge or consent. Do you have any idea of the gravity of this?" "I do, sir," she replied, her voice choked but firm. "But I also have an idea of the gravity of their situation before. They were dying. I saw it. I felt it. As a mother, I couldn't just stand by and watch. My milk, it was the only thing they accepted. It was the only thing that was saving them." He watched her, his dark eyes piercing hers. What if something had gone wrong? What if there was some disease, some contamination? "Did you think of that?" "I thought of everything, sir," Ji-eun said, tears welling up again. "I am healthy. My baby is healthy. I took every precaution. I swear my intention was only their well-being." She pointed to the window, to the city that was beginning to awaken. "Look at them now, sir. They are well, they are happy, they are growing. Isn't that what matters?" Seo-joon leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on Ji-eun, but his mind seemed to be elsewhere. He was confronted with the undeniable truth. His daughters were thriving. The anger was still there, the feeling of betrayal, but the image of the healthy, smiling twins overshadowed everything. He couldn't deny the results. "I need time to process this, Lee Ji-eun," he finally said, his voice lower but still laden with tension. "I don't know what to do with you, or with this." He gestured vaguely. "For now, continue with your duties, but don't dare do anything else without my express permission. Understood?" Ji-eun felt a sudden, overwhelming relief. She hadn't been dismissed, not yet. "Yes, sir, understood. Thank you, sir." He dismissed her with a nod, and Ji-eun left the office, her body trembling, but her heart a little lighter. The tightrope was still there, but for now, she hadn't fallen. Seo-joon, for his part, remained in his office, looking at the city, the image of his healthy daughters, and Ji-eun's words hammering in his mind. Her decision was unforgivable, but the results were undeniable. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a pang of something akin to hope, mixed with deep confusion. He tried to work, but his eyes kept straying to the monitor screen, where photos of the twins in their early days, pale, thin, with dark circles under their eyes, contrasted painfully with the recent images the housekeeper had sent him. Rosy cheeks, bright eyes, tiny smiles. The difference was stark. It was a miracle. And the miracle had a name, Lee Ji-eun. The anger still bubbled. The breach of trust was a blow to his control, to his order. But gratitude, that was a new and dangerous emotion. He didn't want to owe anyone anything, much less an employee who had disobeyed him. However, the sight of his daughters thriving was an argument that no logic or fury could overturn. He found himself at an impasse. In the following days, a palpable tension hung over the Park mansion. Ji-un continued with her duties, but every movement was calculated, every word measured. She dedicated herself to the twins with the same tenderness and love as always, and they responded with joyful coos and smiles. The house, once a sanctuary of crying and despair, now echoed with the soft laughter of the babies. Seo-jun, for his part, began to spend more time at home. It wasn't a conscious decision to observe her, but a need to see his daughters. He found them in the nursery, in the garden, always with Ji-un. He saw her hum to them, change their diapers with gentle dexterity, rock them to sleep with infinite patience. He noticed the way the twins' eyes followed her, the security they found in her arms. It was an undeniable bond, and he felt a pang of envy. One afternoon, as Seo-jun watched Ji-un feed the twins with the milk he now knew was hers, a bottle he had instructed the housekeeper to prepare discreetly, without questioning, the front door opened with a flourish. It was Mrs. Park, his mother, elegant, impeccable, with a gaze that could freeze the air. "Seo-jun, my son, and my granddaughters," she exclaimed, her melodious voice, but with a sharp edge. She barely noticed Ji-un, who bowed respectfully, holding Seo-yeon in her lap. "Mother," Seo-jun greeted, the tension in his shoulders increasing. He knew this encounter would be inevitable and problematic. Mrs. Park walked to the nursery, her eyes assessing everything with surgical precision. She observed Ha-eun, who was in the crib, and then Seo-yeon in Ji-un's arms. "Oh, they're so plump," she commented, a tone of surprise in her voice. "They look much healthier than the last time I saw them. What are you doing differently, Seo-jun? Have you finally found a competent nanny?" Seo-jun hesitated. "Ji-un has been very dedicated, mother." Mrs. Park finally looked at Ji-un, a gaze that swept the nanny up and down. "Ah yes, the new nanny. You are Ms. Lee, aren't you? The one who came from a more humble neighborhood?" There was a subtle disdain in her voice, an insinuation that Ji-un's background was a flaw. "I heard you have unorthodox methods." Ji-un felt her face flush, but she maintained her composure. "I'm just doing my best to ensure the girls thrive, Mrs. Park." "Thrive, yes, but at what cost?" Mrs. Park continued, ignoring Ji-un's answer and addressing Seo-jun. "Seo-jun, you know reputation is everything. We cannot have a nanny with questionable methods caring for your daughters. People talk. What if there's some scandal? What will the other parents say? And the girl's health. Are you sure she's following all medical guidelines? It's not as if she has the experience of an elite nanny, is it?" She approached Ji-un, who still held Seo-yeon. "Are you sure you're fit for this responsibility, Ms. Lee? Caring for a CEO's daughters isn't like caring for just any child. They need the best, the highest quality in everything, and that includes their feeding, of course." Her eyes lingered on the bottle in Ji-un's hand, a gleam of suspicion in them. "What exactly are you giving them? It looks different." Ji-un clutched Seo-yeon a little closer, feeling the warmth of the small body against hers. She looked at Seo-jun, seeking some support, but he was motionless, watching the scene with an unreadable expression. Humiliation began to burn in her chest. She knew Mrs. Park was trying to discredit her, undermine her position. "It's what the girls accept, Mrs. Park," Ji-un replied, her voice low but firm. "And they are thriving." Mrs. Park laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Accept? My granddaughters don't accept just anything, Ms. Lee. They deserve the best, and the best isn't. Well, it's not what one would expect from a nanny without high-level credentials. Seo-jun, we need to discuss this. We cannot risk the girl's health or image with such an impulsive decision." Seo-jun felt a lump in his throat. He saw the pain and humiliation in Ji-un's eyes, the way she flinched slightly, yet still held her head high, and he saw his daughters, plump and happy, in her arms. The anger he felt at Ji-eun's disobedience began to be replaced by a different fury, a protective fury that caught him by surprise. His mother was being cruel, unfair, and for the first time, he felt an uncontrollable urge to intervene. "Mother, that's enough," Seo-jun said, his voice cutting through the air like an ice blade. Mrs. Park stopped abruptly, turning to him with a shocked expression. She wasn't used to being interrupted, much less by her son, who usually let her handle social situations. "Seo-jun, what is this? I'm just expressing my legitimate concerns about your daughter's health and our family's reputation," she retorted, her voice a little sharper. "My daughters are thriving, mother," he continued, ignoring her interjection. His eyes, previously unreadable, now gleamed with an intensity Ji-eun had never seen. "And that is largely due to Ms. Lee's dedication. Her unorthodox methods, as you call them, were the only ones that worked when no one else could. They were starving, mother. Do you remember that?" Mrs. Park blinked, taken aback by the frankness and emotion in her son's voice. "But Seo-jun, there are protocols, there are elite professionals. We can't just trust anyone who—" "It's not anyone, mother," Seo-jun interrupted her again, stepping forward, closing the distance between them. "It's Ms. Lee, and she saved my daughters. I won't allow you to humiliate her or question her competence in front of them or in front of me." He cast a meaningful glance at Ji-eun, who still held Seo-yeon, her eyes brimming with tears. "Look at them. They are healthy, happy. That's all that matters." Ji-eun felt a shock run through her body. Seo-jun's words were an unexpected shield, a public defense she would never have imagined receiving from him. The humiliation began to dissipate, replaced by a wave of gratitude and even greater confusion. He, the man who had confronted her with such fury days before, was now protecting her against his own mother. Mrs. Park was speechless for a moment, her face pale with indignation. "Seo-jun, you are disrespecting me. I'm trying to protect you and your daughters from an embarrassing situation. People will talk." "Let them talk," Seo-jun said, his voice now calmer, but with an unwavering authority. "My daughters are alive and well, and I trust Ms. Lee to care for them. If you have any concerns, you can discuss them with me in private, but not in front of my employee, and more importantly, not in front of my daughters." He cast a meaningful glance at Ji-eun, who still held Seo-yeon, her eyes brimming with tears. Mrs. Park realized she had lost the battle. Her son, the indifferent workaholic, was defending the humble nanny with a passion she had never seen in him, not even for his late wife. With a sigh of disdain, she turned her back. "Very well, Seo-jun, it seems you've made your decisions, but don't say I didn't warn you." She left the nursery, the sound of her heels echoing through the mansion, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Seo-jun and Ji-eun were left alone with the twins. The air was charged with the newly dissipated tension and a new, strange intimacy. Seo-jun turned to Ji-eun, his gaze softening slightly, yet still with a hint of his usual seriousness. "Are you all right, Ms. Lee?" he asked, his voice a little lower than usual. Ji-eun nodded, unable to find her voice immediately. "Yes, sir. Thank you. I didn't expect—" He waved his hand, as if to dismiss the gratitude. "There's no need. My mother can be excessive. But she has no right to treat you like that. You've done an exceptional job with the girls. That's undeniable." He approached Ha-eun, who was in the crib, and touched her small hand. The baby grasped his finger with surprising strength. Seo-jun looked at his daughter, a small, almost imperceptible smile appearing on his lips. Ji-eun watched the scene, her heart beating faster. That man, so cold and distant, had a side she was only beginning to glimpse. He had defended her, and in doing so, he had defended his daughters, and a part of himself he seemed to have forgotten. The air between them, once tense with anger and distrust, now vibrated with something new and uncertain. Ji-yoon still held Seo-yeon, feeling the warmth of the small body, but her mind was in a whirlwind. Seo-jun's words, so firm and unexpected, echoed in her ears like distant thunder. He had defended her, not just her, but her work, her dedication, her effectiveness. "Are you all right, Ms. Lee?" he asked again, his voice softer than she had ever heard. Ji-eun nodded, finally finding a bit of her voice. "Yes, sir, I'm fine. Thank you." She didn't know what else to say. The gratitude was immense, but the confusion was even greater. The man who had looked at her with such fury for her audacity was now protecting her with the same intensity. Seo-jun waved his hand, as if to dismiss the gratitude, but his eyes didn't leave her. He no longer seemed the cold, distant CEO. There was a subtle vulnerability in his gaze, a reflection of something he himself was processing. "There's no need. My mother can be excessive. That's undeniable." The baby grasped his finger with surprising strength, an instinctive reflex that always melted Ji-eun's heart. It wasn't the forced smile he sometimes showed at social events, but a genuine one, born from the connection with his daughter. He had defended her. The silence that followed was no longer tense, but laden with a new understanding. Seo-jun turned to Ji-eun, his eyes meeting hers. "They are truly well," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "Much better than I could have imagined." "They are strong, sir," Ji-eun replied, a gentle warmth spreading through her chest. "And they feel the love." Seo-jun didn't respond immediately. He just watched her, and Ji-eun felt a blush rise to her face under his intense gaze. It was a gaze that seemed to try to decipher an enigma, a search for something he couldn't name. He noticed the way she held Seo-yeon, with a tenderness he had never seen in any other caregiver. He noticed the slight milk stain on her blouse shoulder, a sign of her continuous dedication. "Keep doing what you're doing, Ms. Lee," he finally said, his voice regaining some of its usual authority, but with a layer of respect that hadn't been there before. I trust you with them." The words, "I trust you," it were more powerful than any compliment. They were a validation, a recognition that went beyond professionalism. Ji-eun felt a lump in her throat. "Yes, sir, I will." He nodded, and then with a last look at the twins, and a brief yet meaningful one at Ji-eun, he turned and left the nursery. The sound of his footsteps disappeared, leaving Ji-eun alone with the girls. She sat in the rocking chair, gently rocking Seo-yeon, while Ha-eun happily cooed in her crib. The mansion seemed quieter now, but the silence was no longer oppressive. It was a silence of change. Ji-eun closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She had come to this house desperate for work, willing to do anything to support her own child. She had found a challenge, a secret, and now an unexpected protector. CEO Park Seo-jun was not the man she thought he was, and she, Lee Ji-eun, was starting to feel things she shouldn't feel for him. The path ahead seemed more uncertain than ever, but for the first time, she didn't feel alone. A seed of something new and fragile had been planted in the heart of that house, and she wondered what would grow from it. Ji-eun felt the silence deepen in the mansion, but it wasn't the oppressive silence from before. It was a silence that seemed to breathe, laden with the echo of Park Seo-jun's words. She still cradled Seo-yeon, the small, warm, heavy body in her arms, and her mind was in a whirlwind. He had defended her, not just with words, but with a conviction that surprised her. The gratitude was a lump in her throat, but the confusion was even greater. "I trust you with them." The words resonated. They weren't just about the twins, but about her ability, her dedication. It was a recognition that went beyond professionalism, touching something deeper. Ji-eun felt a dangerous warmth spread through her chest, a warmth she shouldn't feel. She was just the nanny. He was her employer. But his gaze, the subtle vulnerability she had glimpsed, the way he had defended her and by extension the well-being of his daughters, was dismantling all her defenses. She looked at Seo Yeon, who was sleeping peacefully, and then at Ha Eun, who happily cooed in her crib. The girls were the bridge between them, the reason for everything. They were the proof that love, even the most unexpected, could heal. Downstairs, in the imposing living room, Mrs. Park, Seo Jun's mother, still seethed with rage. How could he defend that woman in front of me? Has he gone mad? The butler, Mr. Kim, maintained his impeccable posture. Mr. Park seemed quite convinced, ma'am. The girls truly are thriving under Ms. Lee's care. Mrs. Park huffed. Thriving? It's all a charade. She's manipulating him, I know it. He was never like this. Ever since their mother passed away, he became so distant. And now, this woman appears, and he acts as if she's the savior. Meanwhile, in his office upstairs, Park Seo-jun couldn't concentrate on the financial reports in front of him. His mother's words, full of scorn, and Ji-yoon's, so simple and full of truth, mingled in his mind. He stood up and went to the window, looking out at the vast garden that stretched below. Why had he defended her with such vehemence? He had always been a man of logic, of facts, and the facts were undeniable. His daughters were alive, healthy, smiling, they were thriving, and all of it was due to Lee Ji-eun. He remembered the blush on her face under his gaze, the way she held Seo Yeon, as if the small life was the most precious thing in the world, the milk stain on her shoulder, a silent reminder of her sacrifice. He had been annoyed by her audacity, by her breaking of rules, but the truth was that she had done what no one else could. She had saved his daughters, and in doing so she had begun to save a part of him he thought had died with his wife. There was something about Ji-eun that disarmed him, a genuine kindness, a quiet strength, a dedication he rarely saw in his world of interests and appearances. He couldn't deny the subtle attraction he felt, the curiosity she awakened. It was dangerous, improper, yet undeniable. Later that night, Ji-eun was in the kitchen preparing the bottles for the next feeding. Now, a mix of her milk and formula, according to the pediatrician's instructions, and the tacit agreement with Seo-jun. She felt a presence and turned to see Seo-jun standing in the doorway, watching her. "Mr. Park," she said, a slight blush rising to her face. "Ms. Lee," he replied, his voice softer than usual. He didn't approach, just observed her. "Are the girls sleeping?" "Yes, sir. I just put them down." A small silence settled, filled only by the soft bubbling of boiling water. I wanted to thank you again," Ji-eun finally said, breaking the silence. "For earlier today, no one has ever defended me like that." Seo-jun looked away for a moment, as if the words had caught him off guard. "There's no need. I merely stated the truth. You have been indispensable." The last word was said with a hesitation Ji-eun didn't expect. He looked at her again, and this time the gaze was longer, more intense, laden with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. It was a mix of gratitude, respect, and something more, something that made Ji-eun's heart race. "Good night, Ms. Lee," he said, his voice a little hoarse, and turned to leave. "Good night, Mr. Park," she replied, watching him disappear. Ji-eun leaned against the counter, feeling the warmth of the water vapor on her face. Indispensable. The word echoed in her mind. She had come to this house desperate for work, willing to do anything. Now she was becoming indispensable to the girls, and perhaps, just perhaps, to the man who loved them. Indispensable. The word echoed in her mind, an echo that resonated with the accelerated beat of her own heart. She had come to this house desperate for work, willing to do anything to support her child. Now she found herself not just as a caregiver, but as a fundamental piece in the lives of those girls, And somehow, in the life of the man who loved them, the future was a mystery. But the loneliness that had accompanied her for so long seemed to diminish, replaced by a sense of belonging, of a purpose that went beyond what she had ever imagined. A seed of something new and fragile had been planted in the heart of that house, and she wondered, with a mix of fear and hope, what kind of flower would bloom from it. Ji-un remained in the kitchen, the aroma of milk and formula still lingering in the air. The word indispensable danced in her mind, a soft echo that mingled with the accelerated beat of her heart. She had come to this house with the sole purpose of surviving, of securing a future for her own child. Now, however, she felt entangled in something much larger, something that challenged all her expectations and made her question the limits of her own heart. Mr. Park, the man she initially feared and respected from a distance, was revealing himself in a way she never imagined. His passionate defense, his intense gaze, the vulnerability he allowed to show in moments of silence, all of it was dismantling the barriers she had erected. It was dangerous. She knew she was the nanny, he the boss, but the connection forming between them, mediated by the small lives of the twins, was undeniable. She sighed, trying to push away such confusing thoughts. There was work to do. While Ji-un tried to reorganize her thoughts downstairs, Mrs. Park couldn't contain her fury. She was in her room, calling an influential friend, her voice low and full of venom. "No, darling, you don't understand. It's not just a nanny. She's a usurper. She's insinuating herself into my son's life, manipulating him with the children." He defended her, in front of me, as if I were the one in the wrong. The friend on the other end of the line murmured something that Mrs. Park ignored. "I won't allow it. Park Seo-jun is my son. The girls are my granddaughters. And this woman, she has to go. I need a solution, something to unmask her, to show everyone who she really is. Do you know anyone who can investigate?" Discreetly, of course. A cruel smile formed on Mrs. Park's lips. "Yes, that's right. I need something that will make her seem unsuitable, irresponsible, something that proves she isn't worthy of being near my family." The call ended, and Mrs. Park stood up, walking to the window. The garden, once a source of tranquility, now seemed a battleground. "You won't defeat me, Ms. Lee. No one interferes with my family and gets away unscathed." Upstairs, Seo-jun was still in his office, but the financial reports had been completely forgotten. He couldn't stop thinking about Ji-un. The image of her in the kitchen, the blush on her face, the gratitude in her eyes when he defended her. He had acted on impulse, yes, but he didn't regret it. His mother was wrong. Ji-un wasn't manipulating him. She was saving his daughters, and in doing so, she was unearthing feelings he thought were buried forever. He felt attracted to her quiet strength, her unwavering kindness, her dedication. It was an attraction that frightened and intrigued him at the same time. He wasn't a man of emotional impulses, but with Ji-un, it seemed his logic was constantly being challenged. He stood up and walked silently to the twins' room. The door was ajar. Ji-un was sitting in an armchair, rocking Seo-yeon, who was sleeping soundly. Ha-un was in her crib, a small sound of contentment coming from her. Ji-un looked exhausted, but there was a serenity on her face, a love so palpable that Seo-jun felt a tightening in his chest. She was the personification of dedication. He watched for a long moment, feeling a wave of protectiveness for her and for his daughters. He wouldn't allow his mother or anyone else to drive her away. Not now. Ji-un, feeling a shiver run down her neck, looked up and saw Seo-jun standing in the doorway. He said nothing, just watched her. His gaze was different now, no longer one of judgment or irritation, but of deep understanding, and perhaps something more. She felt the warmth rise to her face again. "Mr. Park," she whispered, not wanting to wake Seo-yeon. He stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind him. "Are they well?" he asked, his voice low and hoarse. "Yes, sir, sleeping like angels." He approached the armchair, looking at Seo-yeon in her arms. Their eyes met. You're tired," he observed, genuine concern in his voice. Ji-eun shook her head. "I'm fine, it's what mothers do." A small, sad smile played on his lips. "I know." He hesitated, and then, to Ji-eun's surprise, reached out and lightly touched her shoulder, a brief, almost imperceptible touch, but one that sent an electric shock through her. "Thank you, Ji-eun," he said, using her first name for the first time. "For everything." The intimacy of the name and touch caught her off guard. She couldn't respond, just looked at him, her heart pounding erratically. He withdrew his hand, his expression becoming more restrained, but the gleam in his eyes remained. "Good night." He turned and left, leaving her alone with the echo of her name and the persistent sensation of his touch. Ji-eun stood there, her body tingling, her mind in a whirl. Ji-eun. He had said her name, not Ms. Lee, but Ji-eun. It was a small detail, but to her it meant a universe. It meant that the barrier between them was diminishing, that he saw her not just as an employee, but as, something more. She hugged Seo-yeon tighter, feeling both euphoric and terrified. The seed had sprouted, and the flower beginning to bloom was beautiful, but also dangerous. Downstairs, in the darkness of her room, Mrs. Park had already made her move. The phone was back on the hook, and somewhere in the city, a discreet investigation into Lee Ji-eun was about to begin. She was sure she would find something that would prove that that woman didn't belong in that world, much less in her family. The game was just beginning. Ji-eun remained in the armchair, the warmth of Seo-yeon in her arms, but the more intense warmth came from within her, where the echo of her name resonated. Ji-eun. Not Ms. Lee, not the formality that marked the insurmountable distance between them, just Ji-eun and the touch. A brief, almost accidental touch, but one that had ignited a spark. She hugged the baby tighter, feeling the small heart beating against hers. It was dangerous. All of it was dangerous. She was a nanny, a humble woman with a child to support. He was CEO Park Seo-joon, a man from a world she could barely conceive. But the heart didn't follow logic, and hers was beating in a way it hadn't in a long time, perhaps ever, an intoxicating mix of hope and dread. The next morning, the house seemed to carry a different kind of silence. Ji-eun, with the twins already fed and playing on their activity mats, prepared breakfast for Seo-joon. She felt strangely aware of every movement, the aroma of coffee, the clinking of cutlery. When he came downstairs, impeccable in his dark suit, their eyes met for an instant, a brief yet intense moment of recognition. "Good morning, Ms. Lee," he said, his voice returning to formality, but there was a gleam in his eyes she couldn't ignore. "Good morning, Mr. Park," she replied, feeling the blush rise again. He sat at the table, and Ji-eun served his coffee and toast. The silence that followed was no longer the heavy silence from before, but a charged, almost comfortable silence. He watched her as she moved around the kitchen, tidying things up. "Are the girls well?" he asked, breaking the silence. "Yes, sir. They're very lively today." He smiled, a small, genuine smile he rarely showed. "That's good." Ji-eun felt a shiver. That smile, that gaze. It was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain the professional distance she knew was necessary. She finished tidying the kitchen and withdrew, feeling his gaze on her back until she was out of sight. Meanwhile, in her luxurious room, Mrs. Park received a call. "Yes, Dr. Kim, any news?" Her voice was cold and calculating. "I see. So she really did have a baby recently, and the father? No record. Interesting." A smile spread across her thin lips. "Keep investigating. I want to know everything, every detail, especially about the child's father and the circumstances of his birth. Something tells me there's more to this story than she wants us to know." Mrs. Park hung up, feeling a wave of dark satisfaction. A single mother with no registered father for the baby. This was gold, a perfect weapon to discredit Ji-eun. Korean society was unforgiving towards women in her situation. She could already imagine the whispers, the looks of disapproval. No one would allow such a woman to become part of the Park family. Throughout the day, Ji-eun began to feel a strange sensation of being watched. Small details. The gardener who seemed to linger longer than usual near the living room window where she played with the twins. The maid who asked slightly more personal questions than usual about her life before coming to the Park household. She tried to ignore it, attributing it to her own paranoia, but the feeling persisted, a tight knot in her stomach. In the afternoon, while the twins were taking their nap, Ji-eun took her own son, Ji-ho, for a short stroll in the garden. She rocked him, singing a soft lullaby. Suddenly, she noticed a dark car parked on the street, a little way from the main entrance. It wasn't a familiar car. The window was slightly lowered, and she had the impression of seeing a flash of a camera lens before the car quickly drove away. Her heart pounded. Was it just her imagination, or was something really happening? In his office, Seo-jun tried to concentrate on an important presentation, but his mind kept wandering. Ji-eun, the name, the face, the smile. He found himself thinking about how she cared for the girls, the patience and love she radiated. He had promised himself he wouldn't allow himself to feel anything for anyone after his wife's death. But Ji-eun was breaking down all his defenses one by one. He felt a pang of concern. His mother had been strangely quiet since the argument. That was never a good sign. He needed to be vigilant, protect Ji-eun, protect his daughters, and perhaps protect himself from a feeling that was growing, undeniable and frightening. He stood up, walking to the window. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in orange hues. He thought of Ji-eun in the garden with Ji-ho, perhaps. The image brought a strange comfort and a new wave of determination. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. He wouldn't allow anyone to hurt Ji-eun or the girls. His mother's game was about to become much more complicated, and he was ready to play. Seo-jun remained at the window, his imposing silhouette against the twilight. The determination in his gaze was cold and calculating, a facet he reserved for business, but which now turned to his personal life. He knew his mother wouldn't act, obviously. She was a strategist, and her tactics were always more insidious. He needed to be one step ahead. Downstairs, Ji-eun felt the weight of that invisible gaze. The sensation of being watched was no longer a paranoia, but a cold certainty that settled in her chest. As she put Ji-ho to sleep in his small, improvised crib in the twins' room, she reviewed the day's events. The gardener who lingered too long, the maid with indiscreet questions, the dark car. Her maternal instinct screamed alert. It wasn't just about her, it was about her children and the little Park twins. The next morning, the tension in the house was almost palpable, though no one mentioned it. Seo-jun came down for breakfast, his eyes sweeping the kitchen with unusual attention. Ji-eun, serving him, felt his gaze, no longer one of judgment, but of protective vigilance. "Ms. Lee," he began, his voice low, "Mrs. Choi, the maid, is off today. She had a family emergency." Ji-eun nodded, but something about the explanation didn't sound right. Mrs. Choi never missed work. "And the gardener," he continued, "will be working at another property for a few days. We need some renovations there." It was a logical explanation, but the way he said it, his gaze fixed on her, made Ji-eun feel a shiver. He was aware. He was acting. "I understand, Mr. Park," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. He merely nodded, turning back to his coffee, but Ji-yoon knew he was clearing the ground, removing his mother's eyes and ears. This calmed her a little, but also made her realize the depth of the game being played. Later, while Seo-jun was in his office, Mrs. Park made her appearance. She descended the stairs with a cold elegance, her eyes fixed on Ji-eun, who was playing with the twins in the living room. "Ms. Lee," her voice was like ice, "could you accompany me for a moment? To the dining room, please." Ji-eun felt her heart pound. It was now. She handed Ha-yun to Seo-yeon, who was already sitting on the activity mat, and followed Mrs. Park. In the dining room, Mrs. Park sat at the head of the table, pointing to the chair opposite her. Ji-eun sat down, her hands clasped in her lap. "So, Ms. Lee," Mrs. Park began, a thin smile on her lips, "I hear you're a mother, a single mother to be exact." The air seemed to thin. Ji-eun felt her blood run cold. Mrs. Park had found out. "Yes, ma'am," Ji-eun replied, her voice almost a whisper. "And the child's father? He's not present, is he? There's no paternity record." Mrs. Park made a dramatic pause, savoring Ji-eun's discomfort. "It's a delicate situation, don't you think? Especially for someone who aspires to work in a house like ours. Reputation is everything, Ms. Lee, and certain life choices can stain not only yours, but that of your employer." Ji-eun felt anger and humiliation bubble up. She wasn't ashamed of her situation, but the way Mrs. Park used it was cruel. "My personal life doesn't interfere with my work, Mrs. Park," Ji-eun said, her voice gaining strength. "I care for your granddaughters with utmost dedication." "Ah, dedication," Mrs. Park sneered. "Or would it be desperation? A woman in your situation with a child to support would do anything for money, wouldn't she? Even take advantage of the kindness of a grieving family." The words were a direct blow. Ji-eun stood up, her eyes brimming with tears, but with a spark of defiance. "I would never take advantage of anyone. I only wanted to help your granddaughters, and I love them as if they were my own. Don't you dare compare." Mrs. Park slammed the table, her voice rising. "You are a nanny, Ms. Lee, an employee, and your history is a risk to this family. I cannot allow a woman with such a questionable past to remain under the same roof as my granddaughters, or with my son." Ji-eun felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. It was a direct threat. She was being dismissed. I understand, Mrs. Park," she said, her voice choked. "I'll pack my things." She turned to leave, her heart in pieces. But before she could take a step, the dining room door opened. Seo-jun stood there, his eyes dark and dangerous, fixed on his mother. He had heard everything. "Mother!" His voice was a controlled thunder. "What are you doing?" Mrs. Park paled, caught off guard. The game indeed was about to become much more complicated. Seo-jun stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a decisive click that echoed in the tense silence. His eyes, previously fixed on his mother, now turned to Ji-eun, who stood, her shoulders slumped, her face streaked with tears. The sight of her, so vulnerable, ignited a protective fury within him. "What am I doing, Seo-jun?" Mrs. Park regained her composure, though her voice still trembled slightly. "I'm protecting this family. I'm correcting a mistake that you, in your naivety, allowed to happen." "Naivety?" Seo-jun laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Mother, you are trying to destroy the only person who brought joy and health back to my daughters. The naivety here is yours for thinking I would allow this." He approached Ji-eun, stopping beside her. His simple proximity was a shield. Ji-eun felt a warmth spread in her chest, a mix of relief and surprise. "Ms. Lee isn't going anywhere," Seo-jun declared, his voice firm and unwavering. "She is essential to this house, to my daughters, and frankly to me." Mrs. Park stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Essential? She's a nanny, Seo-jun, a woman with a questionable past, who had a child out of wedlock and without a father. This is a disgrace to the Park family. Disgrace? Seo-jun turned to his mother, his eyes flashing. The only shame here is your cruelty. Ms. Lee's past is none of your business, nor mine, unless she chooses to share it. What matters is the present. My daughters are thriving, smiling, eating, something that none of your qualified nannies or your advice could achieve. He took Ji-eun's hand, an unexpected gesture that made her catch her breath. Their fingers intertwined, and the strength of his grip was a balm to her wounded soul. I don't care what society thinks, Mother, Seo-jun continued, his voice softer but still laden with authority. I care about my daughter's happiness, and about the happiness of the woman who saved them. Ji-eun is not just an employee, she is part of this family now, and if you cannot accept that, then perhaps it is you who no longer belongs in this house. The words fell like stones. Mrs. Park staggered, her face pale with shock and humiliation. Her own son was kicking her out because of a nanny. Seo-jun, she murmured, her voice weak. No, Mother, he interrupted her. I've made my decision. Ji-eun stays, and I won't allow anyone, not even you, to hurt her again. He turned to Ji-eun, his dark eyes meeting hers. There was a depth in them she had never seen before, a mix of gratitude, admiration, and something more, something that made her heart pound erratically. Ji-eun, he said, his voice now a whisper only she could hear. I know this is a lot to ask, but I want you to stay, not just as a nanny. I want you to stay in our lives. In my life, I can no longer imagine a day without you and Ji-ho here, without the joy you brought, without you. The tears Ji-eun had held back with such effort now flowed freely. His words, so sincere and unexpected, were everything she had secretly longed to hear. The slow burn had finally reached its boiling point. Mr. Park, she began, her voice choked. Seo-jun, he corrected her, squeezing her hand. Please, call me Seo-jun. He looked at her, fear and hope mingled in his gaze. I know it's fast, that it's complicated, but I feel something for you, Ji-eun, something I haven't felt in a long time. And I want to explore it. I want to build something with you, a family, for us, for the girls, for Ji-ho. Ji-eun looked at Mrs. Park, who stood, defeated, before turning her eyes back to Seo-jun. That arrogant and distant man had transformed into someone who saw her, who valued her, who loved her. Yes, Seo-jun, she replied, a trembling smile appearing on her lips. I want to stay. I want to try. Seo-jun smiled, a radiant smile that lit up the room. He pulled her into a gentle embrace, a gesture of promise and a new beginning. Mrs. Park watched the scene, the image of her son and the nanny in an embrace, and knew she had lost. The game had ended, and love, in an unexpected way, had won. The Park household, once a place of mourning and silence, was about to be filled with the sound of laughter, of a new family, and of a love that blossomed where it was least expected.